So it's 2024, but before we bid adieu to last year, I do want to talk about my favorite bikes from 2023 because it's an indication of the kinds of bikes I want to focus on in the future, as well as where I think we're going to see the most interesting things happening in terms of design. The first bike is the Wild Bikes Super Tramp. It's a production bike by Wild Bikes designed to be their ultimate bike packing rig. It's equipped with rack mounts and fender mounts galore and has clearance to take really big meets at 29 by 2.6 inches. While it's designed to be a bike packing rig, as the kids like to call it, I think this kind of sells it short a little bit. It has a really interesting all-rounder geometry that does lean towards the stable side, but it's still fun to ride even if you're not shredding the trails. The chainstay length on this bike in the smaller sizes is 430 and 440 in the medium and large. And while this is long in terms of road bikes and racier gravel bikes, it's still fairly short when you compare it to something like a Rivendell. So for me, it strikes a really nice balance of being planted and stable without feeling like you're steering a boat on the road or the trails. Likewise, the front end on this bike is fairly reasonable. The head tube angle is 69.5. This results in a trail number in the mid 80s that tickles the bottom end of high trail, if you know what I mean. The potentially boaty or sluggish steering is counteracted by having a shorter stem and wide handlebars. In plain English, this means when you're descending on rocky terrain, whether that's double track or single track, the bike feels super stable and comfortable, not twitchy. And it doesn't feel overly sloppy when you're going on a slow speed climb. It's not wandering all over the place like a drunken goat. You might buy this bike if you've got a big bike packing trip in mind, but it's designed, in my opinion, so that the other 80% of the time when you're not getting it, getting rad, getting lost, however you want to phrase it, that it's still a perfectly enjoyable and fun bike to ride. The bike also has some nice custom bike looks like the curved top tube, the segmented stay, the really nice paint job, and it all comes at a pretty decent price for a production bike. Currently, I believe you can only get them as frame sets, but when they were being offered as a complete bike, it was nicely spec'd. Usually when you get an off-the-shelf bike, you're already making a list of those things you want to upgrade, but the test bike I rode was perfectly spec'd. Nothing too blingy, but everything was either mid to high-end-ish components. In a lot of ways, I think the Wild is the spiritual successor of the 90s mountain bike / ATB. However, it is updated for the modern age using those modern components like disc brakes, wider tires, and it also benefits from a couple decades worth of geometry. It doesn't have the same weird and oftentimes hard to fit geometry of 90s mountain bikes. And for those reasons, that is why the Wild Super Tramp was one of my most favorite bikes of 2023. Hey there everybody, it's Future Russ here in the editing bay. Coming into 2024, just like all the years we've been doing this YouTube channel, we are once again unsponsored. We don't get paid to do bike reviews or product reviews. All our income comes from the up and down roller coaster of AdSense, as well as sticker sales and Patreon membership. So if you guys appreciate the fact that we're not getting paid to just shill you stuff, then pick up some stickers, or better yet, join us on Patreon. Let's get back to the video. Along the same veins, but for a lot less money, the other bike that really stood out from last year was the Hudski Doggler. This bike can definitely be a head scratcher. I think most would laugh if you called it a gravel bike. It's definitely not a road bike. And while it looks like a mountain bike, it's a bit of an oddball in having no suspension, not being suspension corrected, and having a fairly low bottom bracket. I think because of this, most people will pass on this bike because it doesn't seem to be designed around a pre-existing category or bike event style. For me, however, it's specifically because of this ambiguity and kind of genre challenging nature of this bike that it stood out to me. Philosophically, I jive with it. It asks the existential question, do we really need a genre, a purpose, a goal to ride a bike? What if you just rode for funsies without any particular kind of event or goal that you're striving for in mind? I know what you're thinking, enough English major, enough of the flowery words. Give me the numbers. Why is this bike so weird and special to you? The bike, by all accounts, has modern progressive mountain bike geometry. So a fairly slack head tube angle at 67.5. For point of reference, that is way slacker than any gravel bike or road bike out there. The rear end is also kind of surprisingly long at 450. The frame is aluminum and the fork is carbon, making for a relatively light bike. Riding the bike did take some adjustment, especially if you're coming from a road or cyclocross bike. Namely, the high trail on the front makes for some awkward steering at first, especially if you're used to using your hands to steer. This is more of a using your core and body English to guide the bike beneath you, if you will. Once you get used to it, however, it becomes second nature. One thing that stood out to me is that despite having a slack front end and a long rear end, because of its relatively low weight, it felt like a pretty good climber. All that new modern progressive mountain bike geometry makes the bike feel super stable and planted when you're going down the chunky stuff. I think the only real gotcha of this bike is the relatively low bottom bracket. This makes it slap happy if you're riding really rocky and rooty trails. That's one reason why, although it's a lot like a mountain bike, it might not actually be the best mountain bike depending on what you're riding on. But for dirt roads or double track, this bike absolutely smashes it. So look, if you're a competitive gravel racer or you plan to get rad at your local mountain bike park, this probably isn't the bike you're gonna reach for. But if you're just tooling around in a purposeless kind of way, and I mean that in the best way possible, you know, not everything has to lead to a specific metric or goal. So if you want to explore dirt roads, hit up the occasional trail, or make your bike commute a little bit more interesting, this is a fun bike for that. And did I mention the price? That's another reason why this bike really trickled up on my list of favorite bikes of last year. You can get a complete bike, super fun to ride, for $1,600. There are fancier models, they cost more money, have a dropper post, all that stuff, but you can get in the door with a bike that is a awesome descender on the chunky stuff, still climbs fairly well, doesn't weigh a boat anchor for under 2K. And that's, I think, pretty remarkable and commendable in today's bike market. So there you have it, my two favorite bikes from 2023. As you can see, they're both in that similar ATB vein. Don't get me wrong, I still like gravel bikes. I do think, however, that period of experimentation with gravel bikes has ended. Now they're just being optimized to death for events and races, and you know, to me that's boring. I think this re-emerging ATB hybrid, if you're a Cynic space, is where it's at, and those are the bikes I'm going to be focusing on in 2024. So as always, everybody, keep the supple side down.